Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer. Exploring the underground is absolutely one of the most extreme pursuits human beings can undertake, and the margins for error, well, they're practically zero. Today, we're opening up the case files. We really want to see exactly how fast the unknown can flip from an exhilarating discovery, right, into a terrifying trap.
We're structuring this explainer around four distinct case studies. First up, the sheer disorientation of being lost in the silt. Second, the terrifying physics of the fatal squeeze. Third, a literal lifesaver known as the rule of thirds. And finally, the chaotic surface interference behind the sand cave tragedy.
All right, part one, Lost in the Silt, the disappearance of Peter Verhelp.
To really grasp this first case, we have to see how quickly a methodical, totally by-the-book mapping expedition can just completely unravel. The setting is September 29th, 1984, deep inside the Sterkfontein Cave in South Africa. Peter Verhelp was part of a three-man team, and they were laying a guideline through an unmapped, wet section of this massive cave system. Now, the operation started incredibly smoothly, but on the return trip, Peter somehow got separated from his friends. He just vanished into these pitch-black, complex, three-dimensional water tunnels. Think about the number 396 feet. That's the exact distance of the guideline the team had successfully laid down just moments before. I mean, they had literally mapped a safe path out. But as they turned to leave, Peter unwittingly drifted into an unmapped secondary side tunnel. And here's the thing about underwater cave systems. Without a physical line connecting you to the exit, you are entirely at the mercy of the environment. The brutal reality of what happened next is honestly just hard to fathom. As Peter frantically searched for a way out, the silt on the cave floor stirred up, reducing visibility to absolute zero. It's like swimming in a dark cloud. When his team called for help, police divers ran into the exact same issue. In fact, this silt was so blinding that the police, who were convinced Peter had already drowned, delayed their search efforts for a full week at a time just to let the water clear. But they were wrong. Peter had actually found a small air pocket. He sat there in total darkness, carefully rationing his tiny flashlight battery, and survived for an unbelievable 14 days. An autopsy ultimately confirmed he didn't drown. He tragically succumbed to starvation after 3 harrowing weeks. When an explorer finally discovered the correct path weeks later, they found Peter's footprints leading to a dead end. Beside his body, he'd left this heartbreaking final message: "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." To make this whole thing even more devastating, investigators realized that during his frantic search for a way out, Peter had entered an opening that missed the true rescue path by just 100 feet. 100 feet.
Moving on to section two, the fatal squeeze, Donald Wellner's descent.
I gotta warn you, the spatial claustrophobia in this next story is extreme. We're shifting from water to the terrifying physical traps of dry caving. On March 27, 1982, an experienced caver named Donald Wellner led his 2 sons and a Boy Scout troop into the Crooked Swamp Cave. Now, this system was notorious for its incredibly narrow, winding passages. Donald, since he was the largest member of the group, acted as the physical benchmark. Basically, the logic was, if he could fit through a tunnel, the scouts could safely make it too. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how fast terrain can betray you. Donald entered an initial squeeze measuring just 18 by 20 inches. I mean, that is so tight he literally couldn't lift his head or move his arms backward. But as he pushed through, the floor just vanished beneath him. He went from a tight 18-inch gap straight into a 5-inch wide, slick mud crevice angled downward at 30 degrees. The slippery mud settled right around him like wet cement, pinning his arms and leaving him with absolutely zero leverage to fight gravity. From there, a frantic ticking clock played out over days. Ropes couldn't pull him up because the loose rocks wedged him tighter with every single tug. By Sunday, teams tried digging from above ground, but tragically, they missed his position laterally by just 12 feet. By Monday, extreme hypothermia was setting in from that freezing mud. A nurse actually used a Doppler machine, but couldn't find a pulse in his exposed legs. Desperate, the rescuers hit impenetrable bedrock and even resorted to using dynamite on Tuesday to blast through the rock. But it was too late. Donald had already passed away from the cold.
Section 3. The Rule of Thirds, the Ogden All-Wed Cave Dive. This next story serves as a really vital educational lesson on the strict, non-negotiable resource management you absolutely need in cave diving. On June 15, 1974, explorers Roger Saleri and Martin Farr set this incredibly ambitious goal to push deep into the unmapped underwater sumps of the Ogden All-Wed Cave in South Wales. Doing something like this requires extreme stamina, precision, and an absolute adherence to protocol. Central to that protocol is a non-negotiable survival mechanic known as the rule of thirds. This is an absolutely crucial takeaway for any high-risk environment. Basically, you consume one-third of your air going in. Then you turn around immediately, using the second third to safely swim out. The final third, you never touch it. It's an emergency reserve just in case you get tangled or lost. But Roger and Martin, who were incredibly driven to find the end of an unmapped sump, made a fatal mistake. They continued exploring well past their first third of air.
You have to respect how strictly this air tank must be divided. 33% for entry, 33% for the exit, and 34% kept strictly as an emergency reserve. Because Roger pushed past his entry allowance, he suddenly found himself low on air, tangled up in his guideline, all while caught in stirred-up silt. In a panic to free himself, he likely cut his own safety line. And without that line to guide him, while dipping way deep into an air supply he no longer really possessed, he swam the wrong way. To really understand the gravity of that mistake, just map out the immense, grueling route they were traversing. Step 1, Sump 1, was a full mile into the cave. Then Sump 2 was a 249-foot swim. Sump 3 was another 850 feet. And Sump 4? That was a monstrous 1,800-foot zigzagging underwater tunnel. This was exactly where Roger's line was cut. The sheer distance separating these divers from the safety of the surface was utterly terrifying. The sobering result of breaking the rule of thirds is pretty much summed up in this number right here: 12 years. Martin only barely survived the harrowing swim back because he had smartly stashed a reserve tank earlier in the route. But the cavern was deemed way too dangerously deep to retrieve Roger. It actually took 12 years before his remains were safely discovered by another explorer and finally brought home to rest. Which brings us to Section 4, the Sand Cave Tragedy, Floyd Collins. Our final case stands apart because it demonstrates how chaotic external factors, and specifically crowd interference, can turn a perilous entrapment into a total fatal disaster. The date is January 30th, 1925. Floyd Collins was hoping to find a lucrative cavern he could open for tourists, so he was exploring Sand Cave in Kentucky completely solo. Deep inside, while crawling backward up this tight slope, his lantern slipped and shattered, plunging him into absolute, total darkness. As he shifted around, he accidentally kicked a loose rock, which tumbled right down and firmly pinned his left leg.
Now, before we get into the rescue itself, I need to remind you of the absolute physical limits of this specific environment. To even reach Floyd, rescuers had to pass through a section called the squeeze. The clearance of this gap was exactly 9 inches. 9 inches. This meant getting heavy machinery or large crews inside the cave was completely impossible. It was this painstaking, one-man-at-a-time extraction effort. But up above ground, a sheer logistical nightmare was unfolding. Word got out, and over 1,000 onlookers, reporters, and tourists descended on the site like a carnival. It was wild. The crowds lit these massive bonfires to stay warm, which inadvertently melted the snow and ice around the cave entrance. All that freezing water funneled straight down the rocks, pouring continuously onto the trapped, immobilized Floyd. On top of that, the sheer weight and movement of 1,000 people on the surface actively destabilized the fragile cave walls beneath them. False rumors even spread like wildfire about a $500,000 reward, which just turned this delicate rescue into a frenzied spectacle. The timeline of Floyd's suffering stretched on for agonizing days. By 95 hours in, a reporter managed to rig a light bulb to Floyd's chest. An identical bulb outside would flicker every single time Floyd drew a breath. But at the 123-hour mark, weakened by all the chaos above, the cave pit collapsed entirely, cutting off all access and food. By 144 hours, teams began desperately digging a brand new tunnel. Tragically, when a worker finally broke through on February 16th, Floyd had already perished from exposure and exhaustion. We've looked at the silt, the squeeze, the fatal miscalculations, and the chaotic crowds. These stories are a really stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the underground. But they also leave us with a profound, lingering question. What drives human beings to explore the absolute extremes of the unknown, despite knowing these ultimate risks? It's a true testament to the resilient, sometimes fatal, human drive to discover exactly what lies in the dark. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep seeking knowledge, and I'll catch you next time.